Bipolar disorder is formerly called manic depressive disorder. It's a mental illness that causes often dramatic shifts in a person's energy and activity levels and concentration. And my understanding is it affects about 1 in 50 people worldwide. And in case of the United States, that turns, if you do the math, it's about 6 million Americans are affected by bipolar disorder. And it's a very unusual disorder. And I'll talk about this with my guest, Eduard Vieta, but there's a lot of famous people that either clearly had or apparently had bipolar disorder. Vincent van Gogh, Virginia Woolf, and Ernest Hemingway are writers, and then a number of actors, Richard Dreyfuss, Stephen Fry, and musicians like Jimi Hendrix and so on. So there seems to be this relationship between bipolar disorder and creativity. And before I introduce Professor Vieta, I'll quote Aristotle. He said, "No great genius has ever existed without a strain of madness." And so I think that kind of puts that in perspective. So my guest today is Eduard Vieta. He's a professor of psychiatry and chair at the University of Barcelona. He heads the Department of Psychiatry and Psychology at the hospital clinic there in Barcelona. He's an expert on bipolar disorder. He's devoted his career largely to bipolar disorder and depression. So he heads a bipolar and depressive disorders program in Barcelona. And he's director of the Spanish Research Network on Mental Health. So he is one of, if not the most prominent psychiatrist in Spain. So welcome, Eduard.
Thank you, Mark. Happy to be here.
And then, can you talk a little bit about your early life? Were either of your parents in medicine or science? How did you get interested in medicine and then the brain?
Yeah, well, to make a long story short, my father wanted to study medicine, but he couldn't. He didn't have money at the time. And he traveled to the US at that time when, high fidelity, music and was at the moment where they were the first home, equipments were being sold. And he introduced high fidelity and all these musical devices in Spain at that time. It was in the 50s or so. And that was, and so the only thing was that he initially had the idea of studying medicine. And my mother had a career on philosophy. But perhaps the combination of a vocation on medicine and a vocation on philosophy took me to Sigmund Freud and his books. And at some point, I decided I wanted to study psychiatry. And of course, this meant that I had to do medicine. But from initially, I wanted to be a psychiatrist and was interested in the human brain and the human mind.
And you got your medical degree in Barcelona at the Autonomous University there?
Yeah, the Autonomous University, which is the competitor of my present university, which is the University of Barcelona.
Okay. And yeah, so you spent most of your time in Barcelona. You were born there and had your training there. And I can understand why you stayed there. It's a great city to be in.
Absolutely.
And do you have a family there? Did you have children?
Yeah, I have 2 children. Actually, my daughter lives in Tokyo, so she's not living with us at the moment, and she's getting married these days. So it's a big thing for us. And my son is living here in Barcelona as well. So at present time, my wife and I are together in our a penthouse, and we have a nice terrace when we can take the Barcelona sun, which is great. Maybe too much, with the climate change now.
Yeah, actually, that's a good. I grew up on a farm, and so I was exposed to sunlight a lot. And actually, recently I had a squamous cell carcinoma develop, and I had that removed a couple days ago. which if you're going to get a cancer, that's one of the least serious ones.
That's easy to heal.
Yeah. Okay, so talk about bipolar disorder. What's the clinical presentation? How does a psychiatrist such as you diagnose someone with bipolar disorder?
Yeah, bipolar disorder is an amazing condition. It's, of course, it's not a good thing to have, but it's amazing. It's totally intriguing, and this is why I become interested in this condition, because when I started as a psychiatrist, I realized that the most amazing and unbelievable stories happen to people with bipolar disorder.
Yeah.
It's complicated. You mentioned the connection with creativity, which is true. It's been shown in scientific studies. It's not just an appreciation from comments from famous people. It's something that has a strong scientific basis. And of course, because of the ups and downs, this clinical picture of people that can be seriously depressed with a loss of motivation, a loss of energy, total inability to work or to do anything, then switching into a mood that is totally extreme in terms of euphoria, sometimes elation, grandiose ideas, great projects, hyperactivity, great speed of thought, and even verboria, which means speaking, being very talkative and very fast in speaking. These things happen to these people, and in between there are periods where patients can be actually totally well and lead a normal life. So it's a complicated condition.
Yeah.
It's not easy to diagnose, even though it is the only condition in medicine that people may feel better than ever when they are ill. This is mania. It's a condition where sometimes the patients are not really aware that something is going wrong with them because they feel so well. But at the end of the day, it's a difficult life that for these patients, because these ups and downs really make very difficult to plan anything and to lead a life that is meaningful, or with a family, with a job, etc. It becomes quite a struggle, quite a challenge to achieve that is normally achievable for people without this condition.
And do they usually come to the clinic because of the depression? Is that?
Yeah, there are two common reasons. The most common one is that they go to the doctor, most often to the primary care doctor, at least in Europe, because of depression. And unless you really are aware of this condition, if you don't ask, if you are the doctor, you don't ask about periods of the opposite of depression, of excitement, hyperactivity, and so on, it becomes misdiagnosed as depression and treated as depression, which is not good, because the treatment of depression is different when depression is part of bipolar disorder. The second scenario, which is relatively common, not as much as this one, is that the patient is brought by the family, or by sometimes even the police or someone, because of a psychotic manic episode. So a period where patient becomes psychotic, which means delusional, maybe with hallucinations, hyperactive, and then is taken to the hospital because of this disturbed behavior that may mean that the patient is giving money away, or is getting naked on the street, or things like this. And sometimes this situation carries the misdiagnosis of schizophrenia. So for both sides, there is a risk of misdiagnosis in this condition.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting. Since it's fairly common, I've come across a few people. Actually, I had probably, I'd say, my best graduate student had bipolar, and that person was really very productive and high functioning. And I don't know, I don't know the personal story with her and treatment, but she seemed I don't know, all I can say is she did very well, and she's done very well. So I think there's kind of within the bipolar diagnosis, there seems to be like a spectrum of functionality and how much this disorder, the degree to which it impairs their daily function, their social life and eventually I guess their levels of achievement and so on.
Yeah, this is correct. In fact, as we mentioned about creativity, and not only creativity, also leadership, entrepreneurship, and other qualities are pretty common in people who have either a soft form of bipolar disorder or a close relative with bipolar disorder, which probably means that some of the genes related to bipolar disorder, because we know it's not one gene, there are plenty of genes. At present time, we've done some of these studies. There are more than 60 genes identified, and there are many more. So the problem of having too many of these genes is that maybe then the expression of those genes is a serious form of bipolar disorder.
Yeah.
But some people may have a few of those genes, and maybe this is an advantage for even for our species, because those genes may confer some of those qualities that we mentioned about creativity, leadership, and others.
Huh. Yeah, that's really interesting point. You know, there has to be some evolutionary. And I guess to point out that oftentimes this disorder, it's fairly early onset, right? People in their 30s, maybe even 20s. So it's, you know, the point is their reproductive age. So, you know, you'd think if it had a severe effect on these genes had such a severe effect on, say, well, ability to reproduce ultimately, that these genes would have been eliminated during evolution. So that's really good
Yeah,
point.
in fact, for very, very serious early onset conditions, the subject may be affected by this. The serious condition may really impair the ability of the subject to reproduce. On the other hand, because this condition carries some disinhibition, excitement, and sometimes some promiscuity during manic episodes, at certain age, it may actually increase, reproductivity. So it's a two-edged sword, right? But
Yeah.
indeed, there is an evolutionary argument for the persistence of this condition across ages in humanity.
Since you mentioned there's, you know, many genes seem to be involved, variants in those genes, and maybe combinations of them. You know, we did a lot of work on Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's, and in this disorders, there are gene mutations that if the person has the mutation, they have a 100% chance of developing Alzheimer's at an early age or Parkinson's. But my understanding is with bipolar, there's no such gene that if you have it, you have a 100% chance of getting bipolar. Is that right?
Correct. In Alzheimer, you have about 5% of clearly genetic, purely genetic transmission. In bipolar, it's never the case. It's always a number of genes, and these genes are not coding that that condition, in fact, but they are coding the expression of proteins or linked to mechanisms that have to do with other aspects, not just regulation of mood. That would be the theory, right? That the problem is the dysregulation of mood, but it's much more than that. You mentioned it in the introduction. I think it's dysregulation of energy, of sleep, dysregulation of many other brain functions. And this is why there are many genes involved, like in diabetes, hypertension, and other conditions.
Yeah, that's a good point. We'll come back to maybe some specific genes a little later. What about, so my understanding, there's in some cases, certain neurological disorders, there are, particularly the ones where there's causal genes, there are animal models that, you know, they don't necessarily perfectly mimic the human condition, but they provide the opportunity to start interrogating the brain at a level that can't be done in humans. So my understanding, there's no really any, right, animal models of bipolar disorder. Is that right?
Well, there are some animal models, but they are, I must say, very poor. I mean, the distance between the model and the reality is really far. First, because, for other organs, not the brain, mice may look relatively similar to humans, You can even use worms or other species for some organs. You can still work it out, but it is really difficult with the brain. And second, in psychiatry, it is even more difficult because the disorders of the brain that are expressed as psychiatric conditions are disorders of brain connectivity and networks that are involved in the way we think, the way we feel, and most animals, even primates, even though primates are the closest to us, but many things in terms of experiments are not allowed to be done in primates. So animal models like mice or rat models do not work very well. And it's a problem, of course, because, for example, even in conditions like epilepsy, it's relatively easy to cause seizures in a rat or a mouse, and then to test any drug that proves to be safe to see whether the drug has some anti-epileptic properties, right? But we cannot do this. We don't have a good animal model for bipolar. We just have for depression, and they are arguable, and for psychosis, when we give some stimulants to animals. But for bipolar, there is no animal that is cycling from ups and downs and things like this yet.
Okay, so then in humans, what's been done looking at the brains of people with bipolar? Functional imaging is a very popular thing these days. What's
Besides the genetic studies that we mentioned already, there's plenty of research on biomarkers. Biomarkers also means some fluid biomarkers, peripheral biomarkers, and this has proven to be very unspecific. So, for example, levels of certain proteins in the brain, like brain-derived neurotrophic factor, this is the name, BDNF, seem to fluctuate, but there is no pure correlation or specificity. From the neuroimaging perspective, there have been now initiatives like the ones very parallel to the ones done in genetics to gather thousands and thousands of cases, because the imaging, you really need a lot of cases to be able to differentiate from one condition to another. Because, again, the problem of unspecificity of the biological tests. So in neuroimaging, there have been studies on structural neuroimaging. Most of those studies show that the patients who have a more serious or more severe form of bipolar disorder with poor outcomes really have a loss of gray matter over time. So there is some effect on the brain that is comparable to the one you would see in chronic stress, also in animals. So chronic stress produces some neuroprogression and loss of gray matter that can be tracked with neuroimaging. But of course, most of the efforts and interest is in functional neuroimaging, as you mentioned, because then we can use some substances to measure, for example, oxygen or glucose consumption by neurons, right? So we can really see the brain in action at present time, and then we can even do some challenging tests. For example, ask the patient to do some calculations, or ask the patient to think about or to think about things that are very emotional, and then we can see whether there is emotional dysregulation or cognitive changes, etc. And all this research is, of course, moving forward, but there are already some interesting findings. For example, to be brief, it's been replicated that the brain in bipolar disorder tends to act very often in what is called the full mode network, which is a network of the brain that is in the middle of the brain, and that is some sort of automatic pilot, like a plane that flies without a pilot deciding what to do, because the pilot is just automatic. The same, many patients with bipolar disorder have difficulties to deactivate this automatic pilot, and then what they think is they're always thinking about themselves and things from inside, and less attentive to what happens outside. So this is one of the findings that's been shown with functional neuroimaging.
Yeah, that's interesting. The default mode network, that's received a lot of attention in a lot of different areas, including Alzheimer's disease, where it seems to be affected very early on. And it also, maybe it kind of makes sense from the standpoint of creativity, because So my understanding, the default mode network, it's like if you close your eyes in a quiet room, so essentially the idea is when you're not receiving a lot of sensory information from the outside, this network is active. And so I don't know, it seems like it's maybe involved in like this, not daydreaming, but like
Yeah,
kind of free thinking type thing, right?
yeah. The problem with this is when you want to deactivate it and focus on something, and then you cannot fully deactivate it. So in your brain, there are two things happening at the same time. What you're interested from, what's happening from outside, and what your brain is still working on from the inside. So this is one of the problems. Of course, again, as you rightly mentioned, there is some issue about specificity, but at the end, all disorders of the brain have similar mechanisms of action or dysfunction.
Yeah.
So the other one that comes from Alzheimer is cognitive reserve. It's a concept that I'm sure you're very familiar with, and now it's being actively investigated also in bipolar disorder and other mental conditions. Because the more the cognitive reserve, so the more the education and the diversity of skills that a brain has been able to develop over time, the better the outcome of the condition, even if it's not Alzheimer, where we know that there is a progressive decline of those skills, but also in mental disorders where there is a more subtle but also clear decline of certain functions. So that's another area of research at present time.
Yeah, that's interesting. You mentioned cognitive reserve because I just invited Jakob Stern to do a podcast on cognitive reserve. He's kind of world's expert on that at Columbia in New York. So that'll be coming up in April. Okay, so one more thing on the MRI, the structural MRI. You said there's reductions in gray matter. Now, there's some data from studies of depression that I think kind of the general idea is that during an episode of major depression, there's like a shrinkage of dendrites, reduction in the number of synapses in certain brain regions, like hippocampus is one that's focused on a lot. But then if patients are successfully treated, and they recover from the depression, these dendrites of the neurons may grow and synapses may form. So I'm wondering, it's not really possible to look at synapses in the same person during a manic episode. And by the way, how long do these manic episodes last? How many days or weeks or whatever typically?
Yeah, these periods of euphoria, of elation, called mania, when they are not so severe, called hypomania, but it's sort of the same thing. Currently, they last much less than in the past. In the natural history, they would take several months. But now patients end up getting treatment much earlier than in the past when there were no treatments, because treatments are only available since 70 years ago. So in all the history of mankind, there were never treatments for that. And we know from that time that the manic episodes would last months. Now they normally take a few weeks and people are treated. Depressive episodes take longer because they are more difficult to treat, believe it or not. It's easier to slow down from mania than to come back up from depression. So that's one of the challenges, and depression may last several months. So we speak about weeks in the case of mania and months in the case of depression.
Okay, but and so anyway, in untreated patients, so I'm envisioning like these dynamic changes over periods of weeks and months in the structure of the neural networks or connectivity, and during the mania episodes. But this issue that you mentioned actually of patients getting treated, diagnosed and treated, that creates a problem in a sense in some of the studies, because ideally you'd want to have a patient that's not treated, and if you're looking at biomarkers or including imaging, you know, the question then, how does the treatment affect the actual what
Yeah,
you're looking at?
that's complicated. I wrote an article with a colleague entitled "The Elephant in the Room: Medication as a Confounder," because clearly that is one of the issues, and ethically we cannot wait forever to treat a patient. We try to get those patients before they get the first treatment to do the neuroimaging. But when somebody is manic, for example, it is very difficult to stay quiet in the machine for, all the neuroimaging techniques. So it becomes another challenge,
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. But what you said is true. I mean, all these dendrites and connectivity are increased and decreased during the episodes, and also according to the treatment. For example, one of the most important treatments for this condition is lithium, and lithium actually increases connectivity, and we can see this because nowadays we can culture the neurons. We can take even we can take cells from the skin and then convert them into neurons, and then culture the neurons and look at the connectivity of several neurons when exposed to substances like lithium. So now we have the opportunity to do these lab studies that show connectivity, although it is not the same to study a few cells than the whole brain. That is, of course, much more complicated.
Yeah, I've had one episode on organoids, brain organoids. I think I'm going to have another, which is kind of initially they were called mini brains, but they're not. They're just, but you do get some organization of neural networks, and some of these organoids does reflect what's actually in the brain. Right. So you mentioned that it's possible to convert the skin cells to neurons, and this they're called induced pluripotent stem cells. And but so is
you
that
can
going
take
on
them
with
from
bipolar? So get skin cells from a patient with bipolar disorder, and then compare neurons derived from those to neurons derived from a control?
Exactly. One thing we're doing now, and this is a study that we are now leading, we have a patent on it, is we take cells from the nose of patients with bipolar disorder.
Interesting.
And then we take some stem cells and we can insert them into a rat brain. And then we can see how the human cells in the rat brain actually interact with the rat cells in the rat brain.
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah, that I had an episode on olfaction, so they have these olfactory epithelial cells, and it's actually some group way back when I was at University of Kentucky, there was a lab that was isolating these olfactory cells from Alzheimer's patients and controls and so on.
Yep.
But it turns out you'd think that like this is like going to hurt a lot or something, but actually it's pretty simple procedure to get those cells.
Yeah, it is. It's a bit painful, but it is tolerable, and is now opening a new gate to understanding the connectivity of these brains in the animal brains, and see how we can also look at the proteomics and all the products that actually derive from those cells.
Yeah, that's very exciting. Very exciting work. I look forward to seeing how that develops. I guess before we get to treatments, you mentioned lithium. Well, as long as we're talking about lithium, yeah. So we hear a lot about lithium now because of it's a major component of batteries, right? And we got all these electric vehicles, and they're mining lithium in Africa and so on, and you hear about it. But it's one of the simplest elements. After the Big Bang, you had first hydrogen, then helium, then lithium. It's the third. As things cool down, you get kind of bigger atoms. Yep. So it's on the periodic table of the elements, it's number 3. And it's in a group of elements that, well, they're called alkali metal elements, but it has a positive charge when it's in solution, so it will like bond with chloride. So you have lithium chloride is kind of a common compound, and then when you put it in water, you get the lithium and the chloride separating. And these small positively charged elements often affect excitability of neurons. I'm going to say sodium, right?
Oh.
Sodium, like the most important, it's critical for excitability of neurons. Calcium, very critical for all sorts of things. Um, and so on, magnesium. So, but it's still not known exactly how lithium is so effective in treating bipolar disorder. So what are some of the hypotheses? There's several, but none of them have really been fully established.
Yeah, probably because we actually don't know very well the ethiopathology or the idiopathology of the condition, right? So that's why we don't know why lithium works. We know a little bit, though. We know that, as you mentioned, lithium is a very simple substance, an element, but it perhaps because of that, it gets into everywhere in our body. It really gets, it combines, it's not stable with, it's not a salt. So the salt that most usually is the salt for lithium is carbonate, but there are others. You could have others. And the body may use it instead of sodium if you don't take sodium. So we know that it's very similar to sodium. And the probable mechanism of action has to do with gene expression. So this is why it is very different from other drugs, because antidepressants and antipsychotics, for example, their action initially is on receptors in the outside of the neuron, right? It's membrane receptors. But lithium gets inside the cell and changes the expression of genes. And this is why it is so complex, because then, everybody has different genes, and the genes, and of course, they end up changing the permeability of the membrane, and as you said, the excitability of the neurons at the end of the day, but also expressing the neuron differently. So if the neurons are cultured, they start to, like a plant that grows, to get connected and interconnected, and it arborizes, it makes the neurons much more connectable and interconnected. So, but of course, this could be something positive or not, but we see that it is positive, at least in bipolar disorder, because some of the hypotheses about this condition is that there is a misconnectivity, a neuronal misconnectivity, in that brain lithium provides alternative routes for connectivity, because there is more connectivity between neurons. So maybe one pathway that is blocked at some point because of stress, chronic stress, reduces all this dendrite growth, etc. It tends to correct that. So that's the present idea. But of course, being a natural thing, it is also dangerous to take lithium without a good monitoring. And this is one of the reasons why lithium is not so much prescribed as it should be, or it ought to be, because many doctors are afraid of patients getting intoxicated, or, and it can be toxic actually at high doses.
Okay, and so lithium's affecting excitability and the morphology, the growth of the neurons through gene expression. Now, I looked quickly at some of the genes that are been risk genes, variants in those are risk genes for bipolar disorder, and several of them seem to relate to ion channels in the membrane, either voltage-dependent calcium channels or glutamate receptor channels, or proteins that associate with glutamate, which is the excitatory neurotransmitter in the brain. But then there's also this evidence for some effect on phospholipids, these lipids in the membrane, and maybe the interaction of those membrane lipids with proteins. I saw this one paper this morning on this protein. It's called CEST-D1. Do you know that one? It's a phospho. It has so it's a protein that binds to membrane lipids, and it binds to the cytoskeleton, the polymers of proteins that control the structure of the neurons. So that's kind of linking kind of what you said about lithium, getting in, and so maybe there's some role for that. I don't know.
Yeah, and also the omega-3 fatty acids as well, even though they are not as powerful as lithium, which is an evidence-based treatment, but the omega-3 fatty acids are also critical for this membrane, phospholipids, and so the integrity of the membrane. So this is something that is also interesting, and I recommend to my patients, not as a treatment but as a prevention strategy, to eat omega-3s in terms of fish, etc. Yeah,
that's interesting. That's a question. I know you don't know the answer, but I'll ask it anyway. Are Eskimos less prone to bipolar disorder? In other words, have there been, I guess, epidemiological or demographic studies where maybe people who, just based on where they are near the ocean or whatever, where there's a lot of fish, are they less likely to develop bipolar, or less severe if they do?
Yeah, this is a good question, because clearly diet differences are very huge. The problem with epidemiological studies is that we don't have good epidemiological studies everywhere, and the expression of the condition, of psychiatric conditions in general, can vary a lot according to culture. So even if you could compare France and Spain, for example, or different states in the US, you would see big differences, which are not accountable for genetics or other conditions. It's more the way we diagnose, which is it's a bit difficult. But what we know is that in areas where there is a lot of consanguinity, a lot of people that marry known or unknown relatives, there is more incidence of bipolar disorder. So clearly that we can know. But the environmental factors are very difficult. For example, now that there is more consumption of cannabis, we know cannabis can be a triggering factor in people who are vulnerable to have bipolar disorder. We don't know whether the increase in consumption of cannabis is actually causing an increase on the incidence of this condition. We are trying to understand that too.
All right. And so beyond lithium, wait a minute. So you mentioned the omega-3 fatty acids. So that's kind of an environmental factor that may influence, right? Are there other environmental factors, in either maybe you mentioned stress. Does early life stress affect one's risk or that kind of thing?
Yeah, early life stress and trauma, or sexual abuse or neglect in childhood, is a risk factor, an environmental risk factor. Also, drugs, both legal and illegal drugs. For example, antidepressants, if given in monotherapy in somebody who has, let's say, bipolar genes, may actually trigger a manic episode, and then make it more visible, right? And
interesting.
Yeah, and also corticosteroids. So drugs used for allergies, for autoimmune diseases, for cancer and transplantation, for example, they may induce manic episodes if given in high doses. It's also the drug, the hormone of stress, right? Cortisol.
Right.
So this is also an important observation. And then the other one, which is also intriguing, is sleep deprivation. So for people, again, who have the genes or more genes for bipolar, if there is a period in life where they sleep less for whatever reason, maybe exams or whatever happens, or maybe the birth of a child or whatever may happen, may cause sleep deprivation, this is a risk factor.
And is that Can that trigger the mania? But I mean, I know that's a trigger. That can be a trigger for depression too.
Yeah, but most commonly for people with risk for bipolar, it triggers mania.
Huh, interesting. I know that like just there's one, if you just stay up one night completely, it actually has like an acute antidepressant effect. Is that right?
Correct.
But then
Correct.
if you go long term, you're get in trouble.
Yeah. So the hypothesis behind this observation, which is true, is that this was a sort of a mechanism when we were, in the prehistory. If there was a night where we had predators around or whatever, it would give you an extra boost of energy. You had to remain awake, but of course it has a limit. And then it comes exhaustion, and then it comes depression, right? But it's true, it happens. If you stay awake, you would notice initially some extra energy that makes you, feel high at some point. And it happens the same with stimulants or cocaine, for example. It gives an extra boost, but there is a rebound effect afterwards.
You know, we're talking about energy. So we did a lot of work on intermittent fasting, right? And in animals, but then I was involved in a lot of human studies too, and a lot of work on how if you get into a ketogenic state, right, where you're using fats and the ketones derived from them, and your neurons use the ketones. I'm thinking, I don't know, for most things, the intermittent fasting seems to be good. It's obviously good for controlling weight, controlling blood sugar. We have evidence in the study we have submitted that it does good things for the human brain. But I don't know about bipolar disorder. Maybe it would be a bad thing. Has like ketogenic diet been tried or?
Yeah, I actually, it's good that you brought this up, because this is the new avenue that many teams, many research groups are now investigating. There is a lot of investment in this area in particular, precisely because of what you said, because the ketogenic diet and intermittent fasting makes the neurons use the ketones,
right,
and introduces some changes in brain functionality. So there is a new avenue for bipolar in these two, and there are some anecdotal cases of improvements of patients doing that. So it's a matter of time that we know the answer.
And then finally, before we get on to more drug treatments or other treatments, what about exercise? It has certainly an antidepressant effect. How does it affect people with bipolar?
In fact, yeah, exercise does a similar thing to what we discussed about lithium. It increases connectivity and neuroplasticity.
Yeah.
So it improves not only depression, but also it increases resilience of the brain. So it's good for bipolar as well. The main problem is that we would like to give or prescribe exercise, but the patients, when they are not well, for them it's very difficult. And for manic patients, it's not good. So manic patients should not do more exercise. They need to slow down, actually. But for depressed patients, it would be good, but many patients do not have the energy and the motivation to do it.
Yeah. All right, then what about other drugs? There's these, you mentioned epilepsy. There are certain drugs that I think were developed for epilepsy that are also used for bipolar.
Yes. Lithium and anticonvulsants are grouped in under the label of mood stabilizers. So these are drugs that are expected, and they have been studied and proven effective. Some of them, not all anticonvulsants are mood stabilizers, but they're expected to stabilize the mood. So it's a good thing for bipolar because they seem to mitigate the ups and downs and to prevent the ups and downs. Because what you don't want, and initially this was the case for the initial drugs that were tested in bipolar, you don't want to treat mania so aggressively that you push the patient into depression and the other way around.
Yeah.
So what you really want is to provide balance. in terms of mood, energy, sleep, etc. And these drugs are, for this reason, the foundation of the treatment of bipolar disorder, because you really want to stabilize the mood. But once the patient is fully manic or fully depressed, these drugs are not strong enough to bring the patient back to normal levels of mood. So they're most often combined with drugs that either accelerate or increase the mood, or drugs that decrease and the mood and activation. So the drugs used to, let's say, to break, to diminish the excitation, excitement, are called antipsychotics. And they're called antipsychotics, but they're actually antimanic as well. They could be named antimanics, but they're called antipsychotics. So even if you are not psychotic, the antimanic drug is helpful. And the other ones are called antidepressants, right? And are the same type of drugs that we use in the most common form of depression, which is called unipolar depression. So these are the three types of drugs that we use the most. There are a few more, but mood stabilizers to keep the balance. And then if the patient is very high, an antipsychotic, if the patient is very low, an antidepressant.
And then what about psychedelics? We hear about this a lot, beneficial in depression, multiple studies now, apparently. Is there any clinical trials?
We're conducting clinical trials both in depression, treatment-resistant depression, and now as well in bipolar depression. These drugs are very potent serotonin agonists. So the reason why we test them is not because we want the patient to get some hallucinations or some sort of mystic experience, but the fact that they are so potent in agonizing serotonin, which is a neurotransmitter that is related to mood regulation, that of course they cause an extremely potent boost of mood from the bottom. So a bottom-up boost of mood, that is an energy, that is the reason why we explore them. Sometimes people think that the psychedelic experience is psychologically important, and I tend to think that it may be important, but the most important thing is that you're actually targeting all the receptors of serotonin, and giving if you compare to antidepressants, the only thing antidepressants do is to reduce the elimination of serotonin between neurons. So they just give a little serotonin, extra serotonin to the brain. But now with these drugs, you're giving a lot of serotonin, but 1,000 more times serotonin. So this is what is the main mechanism of action. And many of them, DMT, for example, dimethyltryptamine, is, as the name says, it's an analog of serotonin. This is present in ayahuasca and also in some animals, like a sort of a special frog. And it's also others like psilocybin are also present in the mushrooms. This is so-called magic mushrooms, etc. So many of these substances are now being synthesized and explored and analyzed and tested in bipolar depression.
You mentioned the frogs. Did you know about what happened in Australia with the cane toads?
No.
Yeah, so this was a long time ago. They were having a problem with a certain insect eating the sugar cane. And so they imported these toads from Hawaii. And these toads have these psychedelic chemicals in them. And then the big mammals, birds were eating the toads.
Oh.
But then the drug culture in Australia, they would boil the toads and then drink that and get hallucinations, and the government had to actually make it illegal to use these toads.
To lick the toads, right? It's illegal.
Yeah. There's actually a documentary on this. It's intended to be serious, but it's actually kind of funny. It's called Cane Toads.
Okay.
Yeah.
I see.
Okay, so yeah, so these psychedelics, they're activating serotonin receptors, and those serotonin receptors are mostly on glutamatergic neurons.
Exactly.
So they're actually, and this is something that's kind of lost to the general public, is that when you hear serotonin is good for depression, or dopamine is the pleasure neurotransmitter, those neurotransmitters, the only way they affect behavior, mood, whatever, is by modifying the ongoing activity of these excitatory circuits that use
Correct.
glutamate. So I think that's kind of an important thing to keep in mind. That's my second book.
Yeah.
It's
And do
on
you speak about GABA as well? Because you can also
yeah.
get into
GABA is the second most important transmitter, right? Abundant. Okay, then other treatments. What about stimulation? Something that's become popular now, and I don't know how popular, but it's used for depression, is transcranial magnetic stimulation. Is that being tried?
Yeah, there are several modalities that have been tried. There is no strong evidence at this point yet that this can actually be effective in bipolar disorder, even though theoretically there should be a way to find out and to design strategy, because it really depends. There's all variability, depends
Right.
on the area you stimulate, depends on many other factors.
Yeah.
But I think the research in this area is very important at the present time, and I think we may come up with potential solutions. What we've done, and we recently published that, is to use invasive stimulation by deep brain stimulation in very severe cases of bipolar disorder. And it worked really well. But that is a more invasive form of treatment. What we would like is to find out a way to stimulate the brain without having to introduce anything. This is introducing a small device. And obviously, it's like in Parkinson or epilepsy.
Yeah.
It's only used in extremely severe cases. But this is a whole area of progress, neuromodulation, etc., that will yield some results shortly, probably.
Yeah. And for the deep brain stimulation, which brain region do you target?
Yeah, what we target is the cingulate, ventral cingulate. Although you could also, there was another option to do the accumbens. At the end, it's the same circuit. So, and the stimulation is to inhibit one of the circuits. So it's not that relevant whether you do it, because so far it's using the same circuit. So it's like cutting the highway, blocking the highway in one point or another point. The objective is at the end of the day that you reduce that avenue, so you reduce the traffic, right? So, but we are using the ventral cingulate at present time, and it's proven very effective, although in very few cases, of course.
I think that bipolar is an example where it's been tremendous advances, right? I mean, you've been talking about all these, treatments, even ways maybe people can modify their lifestyle if they have bipolar. And, so there's a lot of help for people with this condition.
We should mention also psychotherapy, because that is also important.
Yeah.
So besides all those biological treatments, psychoeducation and functional remediation and all this is also important.
Yeah. And is it cognitive behavioral therapy, or what type of?
Our favorite therapy, we call it integrative therapy, combines psychoeducation, which has some components of behavioral therapy, but it also has lifestyle advice, physical health advice, so including exercise, but also other aspects, and then also family education, because sometimes the family can do a lot actually to help the patient if they understand all the nuances around the condition. And then it has also a component of cognitive and functional remediation, because there is a risk of cognitive impairment, functional decline over time for patients who have frequent relapses and so on. So it is important to do some prevention of that. And then finally, we also have we have a manual on this, a little mindfulness training as well, because it really helps the patients to play with this default mode network that we mentioned before. So all these ingredients are given currently, at least in our group, in a 3-month intervention, and it is the most helpful. So it has a little of everything, you know. It's not just one model like cognitive behavioral or so. It has some ingredients from plenty of different interventions.
Yeah. So it must be very rewarding. You've organized and headed a big group there, you know, doing various aspects of, from, you know, obviously seeing and treating patients, but developing new treatments, trying to better understand what's going on in the brain. So it's just kind of I think you're a fantastic example of how a lot of the, you know, motivation and energy,
Yeah,
right?
without mania, but yeah,
No, no.
exactly.
But it's, you know, science and medicine, it's you have to have a lot of motivation, but it comes down to a lot of hard work.
Yeah,
I mean, work isn't necessary. If you love what you're doing, it's not really work.
yeah.
You know, you spend a lot of time on it, but you know, it's enjoyable and rewarding. So
I enjoy it, and it's especially important to understand that this is a team effort. It's because at the end we are a group, and you know, I'm the most visible face of, in the case of our group, but it's a team effort. And now the mankind is also doing this team effort together, because we're gathering samples from all over the world and multiplying our opportunities to help patients with this condition.
yeah, so this coordination is very important in science and medicine.
Excellent.
Okay,
Okay.
Eduard, I enjoyed meeting you and talking with you and learning about bipolar disorder. It's fascinating to me in terms of, it's a very unusual disorder. I think that's a lot to learn yet, but a lot has been learned, and people are benefiting from that knowledge. So thanks a lot.
You're welcome. I enjoy this. Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.